Hello, everyone. It is Jamie Jill right here at MadLit Musings, and today I have a debut author with Revell Publishing, Holly Varni. Hi, Holly. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is exciting. I'm excited to chat about your book and how it got published. And you have your own podcast too, which I've not yet listened to, but we should put a plug in for that for all our podcast listeners that like to listen to podcasts.
Absolutely. It's called Moments from Moonberry Lake.
Awesome. Awesome. So that's also the title of your book, On Moonberry Lake.
Moonberry Lake.
Yeah. So why don't you just jump right in and tell us a little bit about what this book is about and the story behind it?
Well, this is just a heart project. I have been working on this for literally 25 years. And, it came about through, I'd given up on publishing. I've always written. But I used to write for friends, and then I started writing even people's like college essays of like
Mm,
I need to get into a program, and I was like, let me tweak this for you.
mhm.
And then when my church needs something, I was like, we can do better than this. So I've always dabbled in writing, and I always wanted to be published, but it just was not possible. Every door was closed. Consistently, I would go to writers conferences, and everyone knew my story. And I was just like,
Mm.
I'm just the girl that everyone turns down by every editor and every agent. And I kind of slipped in the side door when I entered a contest, and an editor was like, I love this, but she didn't have my name and she
Oh
didn't
no.
have anything. So she started just putting in keywords from the entry and tracked me down online, and then
Wow.
contacted me and said, is this you? Because I'd like to talk to you.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and it kind of um, went off on that. But I love small towns. I've
Okay.
always lived in a small town, and I love that your business is everyone's business and you look out for one another. And I love the
Mhm.
concept of community and knowing your neighbor and loving your neighbor. And so I created this small town world called On Moonberry Lake. It takes
Okay.
place in the Northwoods of Minnesota because I was raised and lived in Minnesota until I married a guy from California that couldn't, that absolutely was not up for the winters.
Oh
And
no.
knowing him, I was like, I don't think you are either. Like, you have to have a certain
Yes,
constitution,
you do.
and he just does not. So I had to move to California, but I'm telling you, I was such an observer and strange little kid that would just stare and stare and just take in people's presence and notice the difference and notice the unique. And I
Mhm.
loved it. And it was just imprinted on my soul, and that's what I write about. And I began, so I kind of, it was the chicken, the egg sort of thing. I
Mhm.
started a podcast before I was ever published.
Sure.
And it was because since nobody wanted my books, I was like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I've been a hospice volunteer for
Mm.
years and years. And I read the stories to my hospice patients.
Oh, I love
And
that.
they absolutely loved them. And then during COVID, when everything was shut down and I couldn't meet in person, I had this little writers group where I seek out elderly people. I
Mhm.
absolutely am in love with them. And in my group, there were a couple of women and a lot was going on. I mean, the
Sure.
pandemic was just
Oh, yeah.
crazy for everyone.
Mhm.
And, my kids had to come home from college, and it was just, we were going through a rough time as a family. And I was just like, you know what, I'm going to step back from writing. And the two elderly women in the group challenged me. They're like, do you just have 20 minutes, because we love to hear what you have to say. I was like, I can't write a novel, but let me tell you, a little story about. And that's how Martha came to be, and she's one of the characters from the
Okay.
book.
Okay.
And it happens to be, she's not in the debut novel, but she's in the books to come. And
Mhm.
she's an elderly character. And so I started writing these little, 600, 700 word,
Sure.
you know, commentaries on what it was like to be old and
Mhm.
complaining about her husband and how it used to be when she was a child and how things have changed. And they loved it. And they kept asking for more and more until I
Yeah.
started recording them. And then they're like, can you just, I created a podcast out of it. It was never my intention. And then right after I did, the book got picked up. And I was like, well, I've created this Moonberry world, and it's really the only thing I write. And I mean, there's lots of stories and lots of characters, but
Oh,
it
sure.
always takes place in Moonberry Lake.
I love
And
it.
so that's me. That's me.
I love it. I love it. So it's kind of, I mean, you'll probably get sick of people asking you this, but is it kind of along the vein of like a Mitford series?
Absolutely is, because
Okay.
the Mitford series meant so much to me when there's this whole cancer story with my mother. And then
Mm,
when I was going through it, and
mhm,
Mitford was a distraction. And I
mm,
wanted to provide the same thing, but I have it's such a different flair, because growing up in Minnesota, I also grew up with Lake Wobegon.
mhm.
And that had a tremendous impact on me of, calming, it's, when he reads it, it's almost like, your blood pressure goes down, you're
Right.
calm, you go into that world. And it's just this slow kind of
Right.
progression.
Right.
And where Mitford starts with, a 60-year-old priest, mine
Mhm.
starts with a 26-year-old woman named Cora Matthews.
Okay.
And the very first scene is she's at her mother's funeral, and
Oh, okay.
now she has literally no one in the world.
Mhm.
And her she finds out at the funeral of this very unusual inheritance from her grandparents that she didn't know she had, but it's on the condition that she stay in Moonberry Lake for 1 year to receive it.
Okay.
And she's kind of a floater. She's just never put down roots anywhere. And she's not sure she can do it, but she realizes this is a sizable enough inheritance that she's like,
Sure.
if I do this, I'll have the seed money to do whatever I want.
Right.
And so she begins staying there in this decrepit lodge that she has to fix, and she has no idea how. And then enters all of these eclectic neighbors that just are so intrusive in her life. And they're all so different. None of them have anything in common. And that's
Mhm.
what I wanted, was to take, 10 people. There's like
Yeah.
13 characters.
Okay.
They have nothing in common.
Mhm.
But by the end, they have all formed a family.
Mm.
And I wanted to really drill that in, because I think we need to get back to that, where
Yeah.
we are right now, of, the person, wherever you are, at work, at school, the person who lives on your street across from you, whatever, it can appear that you have nothing in common. But
Mhm.
when you approach it with like kindness and openness, of like, you're really different from me,
Mhm.
that it just all works. It does.
Yeah.
And so by the end, she has the family she's always wanted. And it's a happy ending. And I wanted I always write happy ending stories,
Mhm.
because I just want people to smile. But what happens in between, someone once said that I make the ridiculous endearing.
Sure.
And I I'm different in that I'm not so much as teaching a lesson. I'm not there's no violence, there's no sex, there's no
Mhm.
swear words, there's nothing like that. There's just a lot of absurd humor.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of my niche, is I embrace that. I write the ridiculous, and I'm
Mhm.
okay with that.
Mhm. Well, the ridiculous is kind of fun. That can be kind of like the comic relief to life that we
Well,
need.
it is, and I think it came out from reading for so many years to my hospice patients, because they
Sure.
needed a distraction.
Yeah.
I didn't want to add to their burden. I
Right.
didn't want to, but sometimes, no matter what you're going through, you need a distraction just for a
Mhm.
moment to breathe.
Mhm.
And that's my writing.
That's so neat. That's so neat. And I love the fact that it started around the elderly and the hospice. And I had my first foray into hospice 2 years ago when my mom went through, and before she passed away. And it's a special sort of person that can sit at the bedside of somebody who is, I would say, on their way to moving to heaven,
Right.
taking a move to heaven, and help them enjoy their final days without that worry and that burden of what's to come that can sometimes be overwhelming. Yeah.
Well, I absolutely feel called to do it. I have for years when I was in college. My major was actually cultural anthropology because I was studying the death and dying practices throughout different cultures.
Okay.
And my anthropology professor pulled me aside and he's like, "Why aren't you an English major?" And I said, "Oh no, death and dying is my calling. It's my calling." And he's just like, "What?" And then, this whole thing began, and
Hmm.
I just, but I've always written, but it was like my thing. It
Yeah,
was so personal. And I know other writers can appreciate like how vulnerable it is to put
yeah,
a story out there.
it is.
And especially one that I've held on to for so many years. And the genesis of this story came as my mom was going through cancer. And
Mm,
at that point, I was like, I just didn't know. She was so violently sick and
mm,
needed this distraction. And the Mitford series helped in that. But
mhm.
then, all of the books weren't out at that time,
Right.
and she needed more. And I was just like, I'm going to write you something. And it started. And little did I know that a few years later that I would be going through the same journey.
Mm,
And I reread my book, and it brought me
okay.
so much comfort.
Sure.
And I thought, maybe this is it. This is why I wrote it, because
Mm,
I felt like it was a gift that God had given me.
mhm.
And so I thought, if that's it, that's enough. But everybody kept saying that first chapter is so funny and so different. And on a whim, I entered a contest. I put it
I
in,
love that.
and then the search began, and it's just been this whole process of learning and putting it out there. And it's really fun to share it with
Hmm.
people, but also I'm like, these are the characters that have been speaking to me for years and years and years. And I mean, they're so real to me. My
Hmm.
husband is just, when he comes in, he's like, "Are you on the phone or are you talking to a character?" And I'm
Funny.
like, "She's not a character, she's real." And I'm like, I just have conversations with these people. I love them so much.
Oh, that's so much fun. And that brings so much personality then into the story too, because the authors like, I mean, they are like real people. I paused my own writing to do this podcast, and these characters are in the middle of the situation. And I'm like, I need to go rescue them. Like they're real. And I just left them alone. A lot of people don't understand that unless you're a reader or a writer. If you're a reader or a writer, you totally get it.
Totally.
Oh, that's super fun. Super fun. I love it. Okay, so you said you were from Minnesota, and so this Moonberry Lake, maybe you told me this, but I'm sorry if my brain fudged out a little bit there. But is Moonberry Lake in Minnesota then?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it's in
Okay.
northern Minnesota. Yes, in
Okay.
the North Woods there, and yep.
Yes, you did mention that. Yep. I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm not too far away in the North Woods and up north and all that good stuff. You betcha.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's such a great area, and I love the Minnesota Wisconsin area, especially this time of year when it's autumn out and all the trees are
Gorgeous.
turning. It's just
Mhm.
stunning right now. It's orange and yellow and just crisp and perfect. That's great. So you have more Moonberry Lakes books coming too, then it sounds like.
I do. The next one that will be coming out September of next year, of 2024,
Mhm.
deals with Delphinium on. She has Delphinium's Floor Emporium on Main Street in downtown Moonberry Lake, and she is suddenly inundated with all of these elderly characters from the nursing home, and they're going on a fake hunger strike, and they're using her flower shop as headquarters, and they're just turning her life upside down.
Oh,
And
goodness.
the director of the nursing home, who's a very handsome man,
Oh, of
is
course.
very upset with Delphinium. And it's a cute story. And the
That's
thing
fun.
is, I wanted to continue with the same protagonist originally, but then my editor's like, let's just shake it up a little
Hmm.
and give them something different. And then
Hmm.
you can always go back to those other characters if you want, because
Yeah.
now that people have read on Moonberry Lake, they have so many questions about the characters. And I'm like, that will actually be in the third book.
Oh, I
Okay.
love it. I love it. That's so much fun when all the characters take on almost their own story within a story.
Right.
And then you kind of have resolution and you kind of don't. The other series that this sort of reminds me of, and it's the one that I never really personally got into the Mitford series, and I don't know why, but I really got into it was Thomas Kincaid. Um, the painter who did all those beautiful paintings,
Mhm,
he
mhm.
he paired up with another person and they did a very similar concept
Yeah,
of the town with a bunch of interesting characters. And you just every time you entered one of the books, you just felt like you're re-entering a familiar place,
right.
but with new stories and seeing people's lives just kind of develop on the page.
I think it's also about breath and where you
Mm,
are at the moment, because the Mitford series took off for people that needed a slower pace,
hmm.
that wanted some calm and quiet in their life, because
Yeah.
it does read a little slower.
Yes.
And if you're looking for action and suspense, you're absolutely going to put it down by the, second
Right.
chapter.
Right.
So when people are like, well, what is this like? And I was like, well, imagine like Mitford series meets Lake Woebegone, and it won't be for everybody,
Hmm.
because you know it it is not going to grip you on like, oh my gosh, who, for your books, you're like, oh, they're hurt, they need to be rescued. And when I was like, we have nothing, we write so differently, we write so I'm never going to scare my audience, I'm gonna like, you know and mine is just like, it's okay, let's
Hmm.
let's read about what's going on with this character. And it's ridiculous. I First of all, I write them so they're comical in itself. They're
Sure. Yeah.
All of these people absolutely are the definition of quirky. And they're like,
Yeah.
wow, you really write eccentric characters. Well, if I looked around, all the characters are truly based on people I've met, truly
Sure.
based on people in my childhood. And
Hmm.
I mean, I really did have someone in my church that had bright red dyed curled hair, and chewed her gum, so when she snapped it, I could see the gold molars in her back. And she
Yep.
wore cat glasses and leopard everything.
Oh,
She would
fun.
only ever be in cat and leopard clothing. And I thought, as a kid, I was like, that's different. I like that. And I
Yeah.
remembered. And so
Yeah.
now people from home that are reading that, they're like, is that so and so? And I can write about all of these people because they passed away. And I
Sure.
was just like, but they made such an impression on me
Right.
as a kid. And
Hmm.
I love quirky and different. And
Yeah.
but for people that are like, I miss that small town feeling, and I'm
Hmm.
going through a hard time right now, and I
Hmm.
can't have anything added to my plate. I'm like, this is for you.
That's perfect. That's awesome. And I love the quirky and different because those characters just become so alive on the page and it's more than just this slow jaunt through story world, but it's a fun one. They got crazy things happening on and off the page that you're like, what just happened?
Well, and going back to what I said, I wanted them to be so different, and to prove to everyone you can get along with someone that is
Hmm.
vastly different
Yeah.
than you. It doesn't matter culturally, politically,
Hmm.
economically, you name it.
Hmm.
I think we could get along with everybody.
Yeah.
I
I think
do.
sometimes we cheat ourselves out of some really great relationships because we draw some line of
Mhm.
separation for whatever the reason being. And you're like, oh, I can't be friends with them. And then yeah, they're just awesome people. So that's great. That's great. So okay, you have on Moonberry Lake, it has just released. So it's available right now, correct?
Mhm.
Awesome. And if readers want to find you, find out more about you, etc., what's the best way for them to do that?
You can just go on my website, hollyvarni.com.
There we go.
And I hope they visit Moments from Moonberry Lake for the podcast,
Yes.
and listen to A Moment with Martha and see what Martha has to say today about everything.
Oh, that's too fun. And you said Martha will be in book two?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. All right. I love it. I love all those little different characters and stuff. I think this will be a fun read. And I think going into fall and winter too, sometimes we need those reads that are just enlightening and uplifting.
Well, I'm always like, just cozy in and just
Yeah.
relax. And a friend of mine just said, it's like a savoring like a chocolate bar. She's like, I'm
Mhm.
reading really slow because I don't want it to end. I'm like, oh, you best compliment I could ever get. You compare it to a dark chocolate.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, if your book is compared to dark chocolate, I think you're kind of on a bestseller list already. Oh, fun. Well, I'm sure we still probably do have some things that we could talk about in the future because while our interests our styles are very different. The fact that you were death and anthropology tells me that we would probably have something more to talk about. But for now, thank you so much for being with me and being here. And I'm really excited for people to get to know on Moonberry Lake and you as an author. And I think you're going to make a great addition to everybody's bookshelves.
Thank you so much. That's so
Thanks.
kind of you.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.